Well, today we have one of the most famous verses in Jeremiah, and this is the famous story of the potter, where the Lord is explaining to Jeremiah that, like the potter who can start all over again, so can the Lord. So we're going to look at that, and we also want to understand this within the context of what's being said here. So we see the potter and we see the story, but we also understand that in the story, Jeremiah is speaking to the people. So what we're looking at is the Lord can start over. And we can talk about that in maybe how that's been done. But let's look at it. We're again going to the Catholic Public Domain version. We're going to go to Jeremiah 18, regardless of what version you may be following, where it's where we're going to be. Jeremiah 18, so you can look that up in whatever version you have. And, I pressed a button and I lost it because now, there's Jeremiah. Okay, we're going to go Jeremiah 18. Let's take a look. We're also in verses 1 through 6. So let's take a look. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Rise up and descend into the house of the potter, and there you will hear my words. And I descended into the house of the potter, and behold, he was making a work on the wheel. And of course, we have that scene. We know what that scene looks like. And the vessel which he was making with his hands out of clay broke. And turning away, he made another vessel, for it had been pleasing in his eyes to make it. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Am I not able to do with you, O house of Israel? Now, that's a hint there, a little bit of a hint. When the Lord is saying that, you realize that this means that Jeremiah is speaking all this to the people. So he just told them the story of the potter, and now he's saying this part. Am I not able to do with you, O house of Israel, just as the potter has done, says the Lord? Behold, like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. So, what is that meaning? Well, this is an important consideration because what's happening? Now, remember, the house of Israel is extremely corrupt. Now, when he's talking to the house of Israel, he's talking to the people. He's not talking to the nation of Israel because that's gone. He's talking to those from Judah, the smaller amount of tribes, I think there were 3, that were originally all connected, all the tribes connected to the house of Israel. Now, let's step back a second to remember who is Israel. Israel is Jacob. Remember? Now, this is going all the way back to Genesis. Israel is Jacob. He is one of the 2 sons of Isaac, who obviously was the one son of Abraham. Well, actually, the one son from Sarah of Abraham. So we have, that's who Jacob is. And Jacob is the father. Jacob is part of this, he is let's go back. He is the father of all these tribes. So who are we looking at? Jacob is the father of all these tribes. And what are the tribes? So the tribes were the 12 children of Jacob, the 12 sons of Jacob, each of them with their own name that became a name of a tribe. So Israel was Jacob's name. Remember, why did Jacob take the name Israel? Because he had a battle with God, and Israel means struggles with God. Okay, so we're back into that, understanding this. So these tribes, which are part of the nation of Judah, are still part of the house of Israel because all the tribes of the Jews are part of the house of Israel, and Israel was Jacob. So they're all part of the tribes that can reach back their descendancy to one of the 12 sons of Israel, who was also Jacob. So we want to understand that. So the Lord is saying, And so here they are saying, well, yeah, those days are over. We're all advanced now. We can now follow these other gods. God isn't doing anything for us. We can do what we want. And of course, corruption is grown into the country. It is dividing among the rich and the poor. And the Lord is saying you need to turn your way back. Remember, they are practicing idolatry, and they're also doing human sacrifice, which, if we want to go all the way back to Jacob, that leads us all the way back to Isaac. And Isaac was almost sacrificed by Abraham. And that whole scenario became a lesson to teach Abraham, unlike all the other cultures around here, you do not do human sacrifice. You've proven your love for me. You do not do human sacrifice. And the Jews were exclusive in that. By the way, we all know, I've told you this before, human sacrifice ended completely by the Roman Empire. The Romans put an end to it. Even though they practiced human sacrifice, you can see that in Pilate had the blood of Galileans mixed with the sacrifices. But afterwards, the Romans ended human sacrifice. When they conquered a nation and they were sacrificing humans, they said, enough of this. That was in the old world. In the new world, it was the Spanish who put an end to it here in our world. People don't like to tell you that story. They'll say, they were such advanced cultures. They were, but the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayans all practiced human sacrifice, and they were sacrificing 1,000 people a day, each tribe. So that's 3,000 people a day times 365. You can see that's basically pretty close to, that's a little bit over 1,000 times 1,000, which is what, 10,000? That can't be right. 10,000 a year? I guess so. I can't do math, you know that. But 3,000, no, wait a minute. No, I have that wrong. 3,000 people a day times 365. So that's 365,000 times 3. We're talking about 1 million people a day. 1 million people a year. Incredible amounts. And this was considered a Holocaust. This was a genocide, rather. The term genocide actually did not exist until after World War II, but we can look back and call that a genocide. This was what was going on among the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incas. And that would be, again, this huge amount of people who were sacrificed, and they were mostly other tribes. So we know all this is going on. Well, we also know, sorry, I had a little bit of cough there. We also know that the Jews practiced human sacrifice, because that's in Jeremiah. They are sacrificing their children to Molech. So this is part of what's going on. You've got this whole thing. So, and they're all saying, but we don't care about the God of the Jews. We don't care about him, because we can worship Molech, and look at how rich we are getting. Look at how powerful we are getting. Look at how wonderful it is. And they're not seeing the bigger picture. So that's what's happening. And the Lord is saying, you've got to turn back. This idolatry is not the way to go. You've got to turn back. And if you don't, then I can just start all over again. Now, if you think about it, in a sense, we're looking at this whole Jewish culture, which we can trace all the way back. We can trace all the way to our own day, but we can trace all the way back to Abraham. Okay, this is that Jewish culture that we can see all the way back to Abraham, but we can also look to it in our day. Well, what happens after the death and resurrection of Jesus? The Lord starts a whole new direction. And that's a whole new way. And the temple is destroyed because it's no longer necessary. There was no longer a need to sacrifice animals to the God of the Jews, because the God of the Jews sent his own sacrifice in his son, and that sacrifice is the ultimate. And so the temple is no longer needed, and the temple ended. There is no temple, never been rebuilt. So we see all of that. So in a sense, we have actually seen this scenario happen. Not so much in the same context, because this was all part of the plan of salvation. But we see the Lord starts a whole new direction that begins with the death and resurrection of Jesus, but basically also ends all of this that we're seeing, which is what Jeremiah is saying. Hey, if you don't want to listen to the Lord, he can start all over again. You don't understand how powerful he is. And you can turn around and say, oh, no, he doesn't have any power. Oh, trust me, he does. He has a lot more power than Molech does. So he's calling you back. You better listen. Otherwise, disaster is going to happen. And remember what happens. The Lord takes away his protection. So Babylon is on its march, and it's marching in. The Lord is not protecting the Judah, and Babylon marches right in, and there you have the Babylonian exile, because he is essentially starting over, and the temple is destroyed. The temple was destroyed twice. It was built by Solomon, destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. It was rebuilt by Cyrus the Persian and destroyed by the Romans. And now you have the Temple Mount with the big dome of the rock on it, which is the Muslim mosque, which is the mosque, the big dome of the rock, and the new temple cannot be rebuilt as long as the dome of the rock is there. So it's fascinating to see all that and see this connection, and this connection to this very passage we can look at and see also. So it's pretty powerful stuff. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We're here every single Monday through Friday. We'll be right back right after this. Have you ever wanted to read the Bible but didn't know which readings to check out? Well, how about looking at the church's daily readings? You can find them at the website of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Just go to bible.usccb.org and click on the date that pops up on that page. There are other options on that page as well. That is bible.usccb.org, and click on the date and you will see the daily readings for your own prayer and study of the Bible. This is a prayerful tip from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. If you're looking for a way to contact the show, there are two ways to do it. You can do it by phone and contact our listener line. Telephone number is 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. You can also email the show at producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. That's producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. Those are two ways to contact the show, and feel free to do that. So again, that's 617-297-7452. You can leave a message on our listener line or send us an email at producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. We're back. So that's one of the things we can look at when we look at our whole story of the Bible. As I've told you many times before, that I didn't get a degree in this. I took a class at Harvard Divinity School, a graduate class, Harvard Divinity School of Biblical Archaeology. So it gave me a very good understanding of the way biblical archaeology works. And when you study that, then you can see just how much of a connection there is to all what we see going on now. I mean, let's look at it this way. You're seeing the Arabs and the Jews fighting, but they've been fighting since forever. They've been fighting since the Jews were on the march from Egypt. And they were, the Hebrews at the time, they were on the march from Egypt taking over the Promised Land. And how did they take over the Promised Land? They took over the Promised Land by forcing the other cultures off the Promised Land, the Canaanites and all that. So you had this big battle that went on, between this big war between these cultures that exists even to this day. There are no more Canaanites, but there are people in the Middle East who can trace their lineage back to the Canaanites. We all know Iran and Iraq are actually Persia. That's really Persia, and all the Persians we hear, including Cyrus the Persian, well, they come from Iran and Iraq. Iran and Iraq were actually two countries that were created by the British back, back in the 20th century. So out of Persia. And, that originally came out of the Ottoman Empire, but that was, which was based in Turkey. But you're looking at a whole history that it's all connected all the way back. It's like one big string of pearls, so to speak, in light of the gospel that last Sunday. But it's one big string of pearls. So we see this connection, and it is fascinating. Just kind of look at how fascinating. And this is one of those things that people are going to go, that's kind of mundane. But I saw a great play with a friend of mine it was a musical, actually, up at the Peterborough Players. It's Peterborough Theater. Peterborough. If you don't know anything about Peterborough, New Hampshire, that is the scene, even though it's not called that, of our town. I think our town is called Grover's Corner or Grover's Mill. Well, that's Peterborough, New Hampshire, and you can literally go in the town. Besides the fact they took the two the main intersection, so the main square in the town, and they changed the names of the two streets in that intersection to the ones that come from our town. But at the same time, you can literally stand in our town. You go, oh, there's right. There's the cemetery. There's the church. There's this. There's that. And you can see that. It's fascinating. But we were riding up to the Peterborough Theater, which is way off in the distance. I mean, I'm talking, well, I guess it's about 3 miles, but it seems a lot longer. And it's through the woods. You're talking, the New Hampshire forest, literally forest up there. So you're out in the woods, a beautiful place in New England. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's out by Mount Monadnock, if you know anything about New England. And on my way, I'm seeing these stone walls. Well, I know from my experience in biblical archaeology, these stone walls that you see, and they're not necessarily connected to property to see them like along the road out in the woods. They could have been built in the 1600s because you can literally see stone structures from 3,000 years ago in the Middle East. It may be just a couple stones, or not a couple, just some stones like a stone wall. And people say that goes all the way back to, King Nebuchadnezzar or whatever. You can actually see that. So when I'm looking at these stone walls, they're in the middle of the forest. You can see them from the road. I'm like, that could have been put together 400 or 500 years ago. They just built a stone wall when they were organizing their property. It's fascinating to understand that whole connection. And when you look at the Bible, and like I said, you can look at the Bible and see the reading today, and you can connect it all the way to our present day. You can go all the way back to the death and resurrection of Jesus and say, well, isn't that what the Lord did? He recreated a people for himself based on the death and resurrection of Jesus, and a whole new people. So we have the Christians, who are an offshoot of Judaism, and it's right there in we can see that story, but we can see that possibility is right there in Jeremiah. And when you're talking Jeremiah, you're talking, somewhere in the vicinity of close to 2,700 years ago. This is fascinating. You've seen that meme that Cleopatra is closer to the landing of the moon time-wise than she is to the pyramids? That's all fascinating. But all of that is a continuity. If you go to the Museum of Fine Arts, which is one of the great museums here in the Northeast, and I prefer it over the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which is a fine museum too. Don't take that the wrong way, but I do prefer it over the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You can see some really fascinating artifacts that go back thousands of years, yet this is human beings simply doing human things that are connected to what we're all about, and we see all of that being connected to the Bible. all of that in a way. Well, let's talk for a minute about the potter. Well, what does the potter do? The potter creates, for example, a cup that they needed to drink water or whatever they need, even doesn't beer go back that far? To drink whatever they're going to be drinking. They need a cup. And, these are some of the fascinating, they needed a cup. There was the potter. He made the cup. He put it in an oven, and there, voila, put some glaze on it, just like happens today, and there you have it. The same process many thousands of years later. It's fascinating that we can connect all this stuff. Now, if you know anything about archaeology, you know that you have this pottery that was in a civilization, and then over time the civilization gets buried and the pottery breaks. So what happens is you get a little piece of that pottery, and you see other pieces, and these you can see, well, these are pottery shards, and they match, from what we can tell, that go all the way back to the design of 2,500 years ago, and they could even possibly find the potter. And this brings up an interesting distinction. When you're studying history, you're studying basically a general picture of the past. Like, let's look at American history. Well, we have the American Revolution, okay? And so we have the American Revolution, which changed the way governments were run. No longer do we have kings. Now we have self-governed. We see new ideas of political philosophy. And we look at all that. Okay. But archaeology will look at what the people were actually using for utensils to eat supper in Concord and Lexington, because it looks at the artifacts that the people left. So archaeology gives you more a picture of daily life and what was used and how things were. I mean, they're very closely connected, but you can see that, which is why you can say historically, well, there were walls built by neighbors to separate their property back in the 1600s, but you can go back and say that wall was built by, Billy Joe Smith, even though they wouldn't have that name back then, in 1622, who was, who decided he wanted nothing to do with the Puritans in Boston, so he moved up to New Hampshire and created his own little property, and then others came with him, they started their own, and each of them built a wall, and there were those walls. But now we get from this group of people left the Puritans to, that's Billy Joe Smith. That was his house. Fascinating thing. And this is the way his house lived. And this is what they used to have for pottery and stuff. Fascinating. This is all part of this whole archaeological understanding. And we can look at that within the context of today's reading. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We'll be right back right after this. Did you know that Catholic TV offers free apps for both Android and iOS users? Visit the website catholictv.com or your app store to download this faith resource to your device. If you're looking for a way to contact the show, there are two ways to do it. You can do it by phone and contact our listener line. Telephone number is 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. You can also email the show at producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. That's producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. Those are two ways to contact the show, and feel free to do that. So again, that's 617-297-7452. You can leave a message on our listener line or send us an email at producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. Well, tomorrow we're going to look at the passage that includes the temple sermon. It's going to be part of the temple sermon. That's what we're going to look at tomorrow. That's how we're going to end the week. Pretty famous. And, one thing I can say when we look at what tomorrow's sermon is, it's chapter 26, 1 through 9. If you want to look at it, if you want to see the whole sermon, it's chapter 26. One thing I can say is, thank God no one hated my sermons that much. When you see what happens. And so we're going to look at that. In the meantime, have your blessed day. Have a blessed day. Remind people, pass the word, subscribe, like, etc., etc. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah. You know the real is back. Father Carr Chaplain from the city of champions, dropping daily reflections coming straight from the field. The raw truth revealed for the strong-willed. It's the Greatest Act of Defiance podcast with your host Father Carr, a message built to last. The Greatest Act of Defiance podcast. That's right, the Greatest Act of Defiance. Word up. Word up. Word up.
The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.